responsibility here. And my main point about the library is I think government is about certain basic functions, and I think our library system is a basic government function, and it should be looked at as priority. That's the only point I'd like to make.
Thank you. Supervisor Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's a little bit premature to sort of get into some of this detail, and especially when we're talking about it might mean X positions might be eliminated. I think to the chair, was it 21 you mentioned 21 as a number? I mean, I think that we need to be very cautious with that right now, because all positions are not made the same, as I'm sure we're going to be hearing. We've had this discussion before, but we'll be hearing it again. When you cut back certain positions, they may be all general fund. You cut other positions, they may be filled, I think, up to maybe, 85 to 100% out of county monies. So all positions are not made equal. So that doesn't make good fiscal sense to just cut positions across the board when we don't, if we're not analyzing where and how those positions are funded. So I think all of this is very speculative. This is very harsh news, and as Supervisor Pinchas said, it may get even harsher. So I think that we need to be cautious right now, and probably number one in these guidelines is as good as anything right now, but it's speculative, and I think we just need to go ahead cautiously, especially when we're talking about the elimination of positions. We're talking about, how we're going to, how this is going to impact various budgets. We still are going to need more information. One of my concerns is, and this always happens in these times of fiscal sort of constraint, is it takes, as it seems, a step further away from performance-based budgeting or zero-based budgeting, where we're really trying to analyze, well, what are the services provided, what are the core components of a particular department, or what are the services that are the essential ones, and how do we make sure those are fully and adequately funded, and then how do we deal with the difficult task of maybe eliminating some of those discretionary services. So I think we still need to get back to that discussion, but this particular fiscal climate makes it difficult to do that, especially when it's this across the board. And again, explore potential impacts of 10% cut in net county costs. Again, that's going to be implemented, if you take that literally, across the board. It doesn't get us to that discussion that I think board members have talked about over years, of trying to have another type of analysis that assists us in doing business. So I still hope we can get to that substantive kind of a discussion, as difficult as that might be with the fiscal realities we're facing. But I think we can't lose sight of that. We've wanted to do it. We've tried to do it. We keep saying, oh, gee, this year we can't get there. And it seems that with these sort of general guidelines, we're even one step further from that. But I can't think of a better one to substitute for number one. So I just want to make those comments on the record, that we need to be mindful of that core discussion that we still need to really figure out a way to have.
Allison.
One of the reasons these are called guidelines as opposed to policies is because we were kind of putting them forward as what would guide us specifically in putting together the proposed budget. That doesn't necessarily tie you as a board. Certainly the final budget hearings is another issue, but we need some place to start as we go forward and put together the proposed budget, and we wanted to be upfront about what the considerations for that were. So you're correct that from a policy standpoint, and particularly as it would be reflected in the final budget, this is definitely the purview of the Board of Supervisors. But we wanted to kind of put that out there so you could think about it, discuss it, and also give us guidance as to whether that's something that should be kind of going through our minds as we're putting together the proposed budget for your review. So
And I do believe that's a good strategy. You need to have guidelines. You need to have general understandings where it might end up. But as we've seen with IHSS funding, it's been called for a reduction in the past, and then it's been refunded. All those things are in flux.
Yeah.
So as long as everybody understands it could be this bad, and shy of that is good news, we have to have guidelines to set the budget and build the budget. So
Yeah, and if I could also respond on the performance budgeting piece. You're right. I mean, this is something that we're aware of. That's something that we want to move forward with. The strategic planning that we're talking about doing is part of coming up with those performance measures. So we are working on that performance measure piece, and then we are trying to, some of the formatting of the budget book that we're looking at, we'll try and emphasize that connection. We're kind of taking, baby steps, if you will, and we hope by the next budget process to be able to put together those performance measures and the budget process and get to that point. So I want to assure you we haven't forgotten about it. We're just trying to do it in a measured way so that we don't overwhelm dealing with the new finance system or dealing with a new CEO. So.
Supervisor.
I'm pretty conservative, but I don't really agree with number 2 there. It says adhere to debt reduction policy, first call on additional revenues to go to debt reduction, not operating expenses. First of all, when you take away our retirement pension obligation bonds, the county's debt on the 2 COPs is $28 million. I don't think that the county is really irreversible in debt load, considering all the assets that the county's had. And we have a good debt payoff policy that we have set up. We've been making our payments, it's going along fine. But if we had, say, a windfall additional revenues, I not necessarily would say, okay, well, it's going to take and speed up that amortization schedule. I think that we have other issues like our roads, and maybe it's water, something that should be at least looked at before we're going to put it to further reduction. Because, we just this year in this budget we're in, we paid off the third COP. We only have 2 remaining COPs outside of the pension obligation bonds, which in my view, the pension obligations are not really even though the county shows in the book as a debt, the money went in the retirement system, so the money's sitting there as an investment. So, but it shows in the county as a debt, but I don't view that in the same debt as our normal 2 COPs that we have. So I just want to go on record that I don't necessarily agree with that. That if somehow we got for instance, I guess you could say that a lawsuit settlement or something that on or insurance settlement, for instance, the Mill Creek Dam settlement, that money could be used for something else, not necessarily to put it into a debt reduction. I just want to bring that out as a point.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor Colfax?
Yeah, we just had a little side conversation. I was going to say pretty much what Johnny said, but I'm not prepared to say much more than that. In fact, I'm prepared to say much less than what he already said. But I think the basic element in all of this is you don't go for debt reduction, or at least we need to understand what the consequences of going for debt reduction in a time of service fallbacks. And so I would even as a guideline, I would take that off there, because we're not going to remember what department we didn't support 5 years from now, but we might be reaping the consequences of a department we didn't support 5 years earlier. And we're certainly not going to pat ourselves on the back because we reduced some debt obligation and collected 1/100th of 1% interest more than we could have otherwise. So I really feel that strategy, or that guideline, carries with it a whole set of economic considerations. Supervisor Delbar, perhaps if you had jumped in, I wouldn't have had to say anything at all.
I gave you that opportunity. But as usual, my assumption, Ms. Glassy, is that, I assume it's my turn, Mr. Chairman.
Yep.